So then we get into tiers. Again, tiers didn't make it onto the flow up in the corner. They get no love, but I've got a place for them in my mind, at least. As an example with tiers, if we're talking about securing data in transit, what tier 1 might be, oh yeah, information in transit should be encrypted. Good. You're on tier 1. Tier 2 might be, okay, your network documentation identifies high-risk data flows. That's not encryption, right? It just says, are you identifying where your high-risk data flows are? That's moving up to tier 2, you're risk informed. Then you get into repeatable controls. And again, this is language taken from the standard good practice. Standard data management process are applied whenever information is transferred. Now you're really starting to integrate your data in transit protections. And then finally, adaptive would be, okay, let's review our security architecture, which would include network and transmission security, and update it as necessary. 1, 2, 3, 4. So moving on from tiers, we're going to look now at reviews. Reviews are where you put it all together. So we talked about effectiveness. That's the testing that we just talked about. Then we're going to talk about, then you look at tier, again, optional. But that can provide a level of integration. How isolated is your firewall operation? How isolated is your security response function? That can help you really break down those silos that I think all of us have seen and have been very frustrated with. And then finally, there's a new concept here, which is coverage. As I mentioned before, most of those informative references just say, oh, encrypt the data. That doesn't, in my mind, cover that outcome. The data is secure when it's in transit. So I would give that a partial rating. It partially covers it, sure, but what are you missing? If you look at the standard of practice, it talks about these other controls that can help you get full coverage. So again, I hope you're doing more than encryption to secure data in transit. I hope you're doing content inspection and data loss prevention, and I hope you know where your network flows are to begin with, so you know where the risks are. There's a lot more to data protection than just encryption. And as people always remind me, encryption is easy, decryption is hard. So there's also how well are you doing that encryption. So now that you've done the review and you really have an idea of where you are, you can say, well, where are our gaps and how can we plan for the future? So this involves creating a new profile. And this is CSF methodology. You create a target profile. Where do you want to be? We want to be at this level of effectiveness. We want to have additional controls. We want to have additional coverage. And you can either make it a perfect state, like this is what we would do perfectly, or more practically, you can give it a time frame, 1 year, 5 years. The way I've now thought about that is if you're hiking, you know there's a summit that you'll reach eventually, but there's also these little peaks along the way. And those are the things that are often better to focus on. So what's your 1 year goal? What's your 5 year goal? So the gaps between your current state and your target, that becomes your plan of work and your key part of your strategy going forward. The SOGP itself has a couple different topics that talk about security planning, security objectives, and topic SG21 is strategy. And there are many reports you can read about how to communicate to management or how to develop visibility into your program. Those are key research projects the ISF has produced over the years. Again, please add your comments and questions here. We have got a few that we'll talk about in a minute. I wanted to take one extra little kind of bonus content here to talk about this idea of OKRs, which many organizations use, objectives and key results. Again, this itself is a tool that enables the business to manage complex technical topics by breaking the objective from the actual thing that's producing the objective. So we're already set up to talk about the CSF and the standard of practice if you think about OKRs. So the objectives, well, those line up pretty well with the CSF objectives. There'll be other objectives like staff retention or training or budget, of course, but in terms of the security outcomes and the security program, that's a pretty good alignment. Controls help you add some depth to what your key results might be. The key results are probably not going to come straight from the standard of good practice, but the standard of good practice can provide details to help you really build out those key results and make them more practical and being measurable. So you can say, okay, we're here, 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 and here. So I have an example. The next slide is an example OKR. And I pulled the objective straight from NIST CSF. If you're not really worried about NIST CSF, the standard of practice itself provides outcomes and objectives. That's the first part that will be free and in the public that Benoit mentioned about the objectives of your program. But sticking with the CSF, there it is. The CI and A of data in transit are protected. That's your objective. Well, what are your key results? These are completely things I've pulled out of the air. They don't reflect any organization, but they're very practical. They're very much like what I would expect a mature organization to be talking about. You define a cycle. Is this a 1 year, 5 year? I can't believe we ever talked about 5-year goals. Things seem so fast these days, but what is it, a 1 year goal? Is it a 5-year goal? Something like encrypting internal application traffic or external data exchanges, finding your high-risk data flows or DLP monitoring. Those are all key results that are very, very compelling for management and identify key risks. So you can talk about a goal like using appropriate and approved encryption. Let me just bring up some notes I have here so I can talk somewhat intelligently about what these are. So for example, you might have a goal for internal application traffic that you do encrypt it. You might have a goal where you actually do it based on risk. You might have a goal where you're actually looking at it in more depth and documenting and repeating it. These controls, which all come from the standard of good practice, are very specific along those lines. So it allows you to ground your tiers. Now, if you don't want to use tiers because nobody uses tiers, poor tiers, that's fine, but you still have to add some depth to that. So these might then move over to the left and say, well, we've documented all our high-risk data flows. How do you know? We have to do a risk assessment and network mapping, and it gets very complicated from there. But this allows you to take the standard good practice, take the CSF, marry them together, and in the middle, meet actual practical program goals that management wants you to get done.
Can I ask you a quick question on this, actually, Alan?
Sure.
And I know I think you have done similar work in previous organizations, right? In the past, how much effort do you estimate this would take, especially if you want to build a specific profile, I guess, with a couple of, well, here we've only got one outcome on this sure. Example. Yeah, you would have what, 70, 80 outcomes.
Oh, that brings up the idea of key controls also. You don't need to have OKRs for all 106 outcomes. I think that for most organizations, that would be suffocating. Some organizations, global financial institutions, maybe they have enough staff and complexity and have the systems and structures and process, they might be able to pull it off. Or you might be able to consolidate. So you might be able to put PRDSO 1, 2, and 3 together and just talk about data being protected, whether it's in use at rest or in transit. So there are some ways to consolidate some of that. The work comes from having spent some time with the standard good practice and knowing where to look is helpful. You can do a word search. You could even do things like put it in your enterprise AI and have your AI help you identify where these specific controls are. It's actually not terribly difficult. You'll see there's a lot of similarity in topics here. IM 1.6, CP 1.1. So these are specific specifications within a topic. The places where the key results come from, that is dependent upon each organization. It could be audit findings. It could be customer or regulatory requirements. It could be senior staff expectations. It could be your own self-assessments that identify gaps. So there could be a lot of things there. This is also an OKR that you could do for a supplier. So you can say, hey, supplier, these are some gaps we've identified, and we want you to deliver on them within a specific time frame. So this is very flexible. And none of this is a strict prescription. You can adapt it as needed for your organization. As I said, most organizations don't do tiers. Or so.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I like the idea of doing some search, word search, bringing of different inputs into the building of this kind of table. This is still quite what I would call a deep mapping, right? A deep level mapping. And of course, at ISF, we offer by default the topic level mapping, so the highest level, but then as we can't really get a feel here in this session for the level of coverage of the SOGP, but the SOGP has a lot of details. It has obviously in the max in total. The latest edition has 544 pages. So of course there is a huge number of controls there. But thanks for that.
Now, one of the things I've noticed about the standard practice, again, it's updated every 2 years, which is phenomenal considering how most standards move at a glacial speed. That update reflects a lot of things. It shows some recent research the ISF has done, so it's grounded in what actually happens in the real world. I was going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about what the latest things in the standard good practice are, and then we'll get to a question.
Yes, of course. And so like I mentioned in the middle of the presentation, the key updates we did in 2026 were primarily around AI. So enhancing all the content we had in AI. We've added some controls for things like agentic AI, simple, as obvious as it sounds, as AI security governance. So from the the sort of top level to the more detailed, in-depth level when you go to agentic AI, and post-quantum as well. Post-quantum is becoming key concern across the organizations we work with. And
when you say you've developed these controls, that's not Benoit saying, I think people should do this, but it's actually, although I hope your experience is included, but you're also talking with external experts, people who are recognized as leaders in an area, government agencies, independent researchers. That's not just your hunch.
Yes, no, of course. And see myself as a curator of all this knowledge. I don't have all this in-depth knowledge. I don't think anyone could have 44-page equivalent of knowledge of cybersecurity. But so we're directing the team, the resources. We're taking inputs from our research team, and talking to experts, SMEs, and organizations as well.
A question did come up about how key controls figure into what I presented today. And the way I think about key controls, it's like the dashboard of your car. There's thousands of data points in your car, and some of them are important, but there are key controls that are on your dashboard, that are always on your dashboard. How fast you're going, how much fuel you have left, things like that. You may or may not have a tachometer, but key indicators like that. There are some that come up from time to time, check engine, but most of the time you don't see that. You may get other information. So I would define a key control as the thing that's always on your dashboard, the thing that you are always looking at. So in this context, once you've identified what those key controls are, just make sure that they're always there. If it's an OKR, probably not going to be specific key controls programmatically, but you have to have a larger dashboard for your security program overall. And those key controls should always be there. So you know how fast you're going, you know if you need to stop and get gas. Those are the things that are always in view. So it's a good question. Thank you. And make sure you keep your key controls in sight at all times. You will find implementations of those key controls in the standard good practice, but for your organization, they might be very specific, like building another data center or finding a backup cloud provider. Those are things that might be mentioned or alluded to in the standard good practice, but you're going to have a very specific thing that might be grounded in budget and geography. So you can, again, it's a place where the specifics and the practical can meet in the standard good practice.
Thanks, Alan. I like this analogy of the dashboard of a car. Let's move on to the wrap-up slides, shall we?
Yeah, so just to wrap it up, the CSF, I believe, and I've always believed, although I resisted at first a little bit, that it's an innovative and useful tool, and it's unique. It's not just a bunch of controls, but it's the outcomes where you can meet with business and talk about your program in practical ways. The SOGP, in a way that no other standard does, provides comprehensive, up-to-date, time-tested, all that stuff of how to build your security program out. I had a boss once who referred to it as the Bible for security management, and it's become so much more since it was really established as having that level of authority. The model provided here, it's a path forward for implementing the two. I'm happy to follow up later, and my email address will be on the screen in just a moment. And then you can use something like OKRs to really tie all of that together. You can leave us feedback either there, or you can just scan in that. If you're an ISF member, that's a direct link using that code on the screen where you can go to a digital community group and talk shop in a way that's hopefully productive for you, or ask questions, or help the ISF improve its products. We are a member-governed organization, so we don't work for our own sake. We work for members' sake exclusively. So hopefully we'll get your input there. We've talked about those questions, and I just want to put this on the screen so people can make note of these email addresses so that you can contact us going forward. Benoit?
Thank you, Alan. Yes, and just wanted to add in a wrap-up that the links you've seen are for our ISF members only. If you're not ISF member, you will have a link, download links where you can leave your details if you want later in this year a copy of the framework document, and if you want right now a copy of the exec summary of the SOGP and more details about what we're doing at the ISF in general. But yes, thank you very much, Alan, for this very interesting insights. Should say as well that we have a lot of organizations who are US or not necessarily US-based, European-based organizations who are very keen on this kind of sessions, because they like the CSF, they like the framework of the CSF, they like this approach of the outcome based, and yet they equally really enjoy working with us with the SOGP. So it's great, I believe, to be able to explain to organizations how these two can work together.
And if you're an ISF member organization, all your subsidiaries can participate in that membership. So if you are here participating today as a U.S. Organization, but you're owned by a European interest, maybe something, I'm trying to think of an example in my mind, just is ING would be an example. Then maybe you want to think about, hey, maybe I should call the home office and find out if we have this ISF membership and how I can participate.
Thank you. We've still got time for a few more questions. I don't see any more coming. Probably one more from me to you again, Alan. Okay. Can you share a little bit more about what you really think is the main benefit of adopting an approach like the one you've shared, rather than, I guess, staying purely with an SOGP and then trying to apply or retrofit some of the concepts of NIST CSF? What do you think you really liked about the approach, the way you've done it, in your organization?
I'd like to get into that, but I want to look at one question that just popped up from a participant.
If we look at this question first, the one I've asked you, sorry, Alan.
Yeah, I'll do that while you read the new question, and we'll go from
there.
Then
I'll check the question.
I would just say I attended a conference years ago where the presenter was talking about how to put management in charge of security, and that felt very threatening at the time, that you basically would go to management and say, hey, we can do 10 things, and number 1 will cost this much, and number 2 will cost that much, and number 3 will cost that much. What do you want us to do? And I found that very scary at the time, but it's actually a good thing to engage management. And I think ultimately will increase the security budget once management has greater visibility into the program. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. The real interest here is having that conversation, engaging management, breaking down those silos. And yes, putting management in charge of security. They are supposed to be operating in terms of the company's shareholders, and that's what they represent. So it really ultimately ends up allowing the organization to work in a much more coordinated fashion.
Thank you, Alan. Facilitates the dialogue, with senior leadership, and that's what I hear as well from a lot of members, colleagues. Yes, we have another question. This is a question about AI. So I mentioned AI-specific controls, some specific controls in agentic AI. Do we provide mappings to other standards, NIST standards, ISO 42001? Simple answer is no, not yet. Like we've explained throughout this webinar, we obviously take the inputs of these standards, we read the standards, we inform them with our ISF research. So there is no reason why we could not offer a mapping. That's what I want to say. If there's a strong demand for mapping to another standard, we can add them. At the moment, at the ISF, we provide 8 mappings by default when you join the ISF membership. If you want more, it's a kind of on demand, and yeah, ask myself or Alan, or primarily myself, as I'm the main recipient to this.
We have another question here that where the attendee is asking, if I need to build an internal framework based on the standard good practice, how can I do this? And is it appropriate to do so based on risk? If so, how? I'll take a stab at that, and then Benoit, if you want to add anything to that, that's terrific. I think one of the key things there is propagating the standard good practice, allowing your IT managers to see it, allowing your auditors to see it. By propagating it, you can you'll see there's much more buy-in. In my personal experience, I actually had the pleasurable surprise of having those kinds of people, auditors and IT managers, ask me when they knew a new version of the standard was coming out before I'd even mentioned it. So it started to become a pull. As far as creating a framework based on that, you'd have to look at the first part of the standard good practice, the framework part. That talks about structurally about the program and how it works together. We've just given you how to structure it based on the standard good practice, the CSF, but you could do it based on the standard good practice itself. And the way to do it based on risk is you'd have to do that assessment and figure out where you are meeting your goals and where you're not meeting your goals. And then you can give yourself a red, green, or yellow, or as they say in England, amber rating, or you can do it numerically and quantitatively based on what your findings are. You can say, oh, we need to work on business continuity, or we need to work on an encryption component or architecture, whatever it might be. So I don't think there's one way to do it, because every organization is different. The politics and dynamics are different. The budget is different. The mission of the organization and risk appetite is different. So I think you have to walk through all those things. But I'm happy to address that, and I think there's a lot more to be said on that topic.
Yeah, I think I should just add one quick thing. As you mentioned, Alan, the SOGP framework is a good starting point when you're an SF member. We give a lot of guidance as to where to start, and equally, it's part of the attraction, I guess, to be part of the SF family, is that we do a lot of that. I do talk every month to members about the SOGP, how to use the SOGP, the use cases of this SOGP. So really trying to make it a living framework. And like Alan said, the other part of the answer, of course, there is not a single way to build your framework. There's lots of different ways, but you can learn from others, from people like us, from experts like us, and from other organizations who do it differently.
Ben, we have a new question for you, which is basically asking, well, what about things like 853, NIST 853? That's mature, it's a well-respected standard, it's free. Why can't people just use that? What's the difference between the SOGP and NIST 853?
Yeah, again, I think we can have a joint answer on that. So I'll start. I mean, from my side, and again, when I update the SOGP, I look, of course, at NIST 853. It's a very valuable resource. It has, it's written in different style. Yeah, it's not, I was going to say different language. It's definitely not a different language, even though it's got a few Z and not S, but that's obviously something a detail, but it's written in a more, I'd say, technical way, right? And SOGP is praised by a lot of members of my peers I interact with for being business oriented, business language. It's easy to understand from the control owners, and they like the style, and the coverage is, on its own, it's broader, because you don't have yet very specific controls for, like I mentioned, agentic AI or post-quantum cryptography. In NIST 853, you'd have to access other parts of other standards of NIST, whereas in SOGP, everything is grouped together. So that'd be my interpretation of the way of explaining why you should use SOGP instead of NIST 853.
My response to that also is you should use 853. It has some technical depth and some usefulness that will also help you if you go to a conference and talk to somebody. However, it's not useful for an enterprise comprehensive edge-to-edge standard. It's not updated. So it's only been updated. It's on version 5, right? The SOGP is like version 20 at this point. It doesn't reflect It reflects the practical experience of the people who are writing it, but it doesn't reflect a street level understanding of security by a large membership organization. So it is an excellent standard. I know I've seen it really be appreciated by architects and engineers, but once you get into management or awareness or IAM or other areas, it starts to fall short. So absolutely use 853. I think you'd be foolish not to. But in terms of what constructing a program that's edge to edge addresses all areas of security. I mentioned before that I looked at the mappings that are out there for data in transit, and every other standard that was published by NIST in its informative reference database was on encryption. I sure hope you're doing something besides encryption for data in transit, and that is my concern with 853. It might lead to very niche, very good, but very limited niche solutions and standards, as opposed to a comprehensive program that addresses security at all different levels, not just technical. I hope that answers your question, Joel. Thank you.
I'm sure it does. Very comprehensive answers. Thank you, Alan. I don't see any more questions. I think we're going to wrap up. As I start wrapping up, if you have any final questions, we're still here for another 2 or 3 minutes. So let's wrap up the session. Thank you very much, Alan, for giving your insight as expert advisor, as you are now, an ex-user consumer of ISF. It's been great to have you. Great to have you on the platform today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate, and in preparing for this presentation, I've come to appreciate the standard, and particularly the work you put into this last update in a way that I didn't quite see before. So coming from a member organization, now seeing how the sausage is made, I'm actually very pleased. I'm more pleased with the ISF than before, and I appreciate the integrity and the expertise you bring to your role.
Thank you very much, Alan. So thank you for the audience. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for raising some interesting questions to us. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out. You have our email, and if you're part of the ISF, you can email within the ISF ecosystem. Our contact details are available. As always, we look forward to continuing this discussion. If you're not yet part of a community, you can head to the attachment section to learn more when you're there. Don't forget to leave us a feedback rating, always very useful for us to know how we did and how we can do sessions like this one today in the future, in the near future. Don't forget also the Cyber Week is not finished. We have another session tomorrow at 11 BST, British Standard Time, GMT +1, and we'll be looking at our 7th showcase session, the shape-shifting inbox modern playbook for threats built in the age of AI. And I'm actually going to be moderating this session, the second section, this 7th session. So thank you again for being with us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, Alan, and see you soon.
Au revoir.